Welcome to the show. I'm Ann Marie Spatharakis, and this is In the Studio. On today's show, we'll hear from two Rhode Island authors about their work, their lives, and the question that we posed for the week on Facebook: what's the best advice you've ever received? Tim Leonard is the author of Rhode Island 101. We'll talk to Tim about what makes Rhode Island so special and some of the really interesting facts that he uncovered about the ocean state. Some of them might just surprise you. That's coming up in the next half hour. But first, I recently sat down in Jamestown with author, lecturer, producer, and practicing psychotherapist, Dr. Santi Meunier, about her work as an author and therapist. Here's that conversation. Thank you for joining us today in the studio.
My name is Dr. Santi Meunier, and I'm a psychotherapist, a practicing psychotherapist, author, and lecturer. It's been a very evolutionary process, my work. I never really wanted to become a psychotherapist. I was sort of led to it. I started out in show business and was very active, went to Los Angeles and was sick of being out of work, so I became a producer. And it was when I was producing, I was asked to write a film about the ancient continent of Atlantis, and was actually sent on a research mission, actually down to the Casey Foundation in Virginia and then over to Egypt, where when I got over there, it was 1980 and it was the middle of the hostage crisis, the Iranian hostage crisis, and the film, everybody got sent home except me, and I was sort of stuck there. And I spent many, many days. They confiscated my luggage. This is kind of a long answer, but this is really the turning point in my life. While I was in Egypt and in this very, very scary situation, I had to go within. I was 28 years old, and it was 1980, and I had no idea about the Middle East or, you know, when I got off the plane, everybody had machine guns. It was very scary and getting frisked even in the fanciest of hotels. Anyway, I had been taught a long time ago, you know, if you're afraid, get out of yourself. Do something for somebody else. And so I decided to go to children's hospitals and orphanages. I found a driver who spoke Egyptian and Italian, in addition to English. And most of the orphanages are run by the Vatican, so that's why the Italian was so important. And I went to these orphanages and just worked with the children, played with the children, got out of myself, and felt very, very grateful. You know, I remember one time I brought a big bag of bubble gum, and so many of the children didn't have teeth or couldn't chew the gum because of gum disease, and it wasn't because of sugar, it was because of malnutrition. And so as the weeks went by and I was stuck in Egypt, I became more and more internalized in prayer and meditation. And it was really revealed to me at that time that I was to go back to school and get an education and become a psychotherapist and write the story of what had happened to me in Egypt. So I did. I had an associate's degree from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, where I had gone in New York City. And, you know, my parents had died when I was young, so I had to work and put myself through school, and I got myself a BA and then an MA, and then I started to practice, go into private practice. But I was always very interested in yoga and yoga therapy, and I had done the yoga therapy training. So a lot of my clientele was basically yoga and yoga therapy, which is trauma release, really, the ways that fear and trauma house themselves in our bodies. So when I became a psychotherapist, having that training and the training of hypnosis and meditation and prayer was so helpful, because it was always in my mind to be a holistic therapist, body, mind, and spirit. And I kind of, you know, kid with my clients that if they're not interested in at least the aspect of spirit, I'm the wrong lady for them. That I didn't have an agenda about what they believed, as long as they believed that it was possible that something greater than themselves existed, and that the problem might be spiritual in nature in terms of what they came in with. So that really began my journey. That was many, many years of night school and working, but you know, the value of it, when we do something, and this is true for all of us, when we do something that's hard, that we really didn't even think that we could do, the world can't take it away from you. It gives us that self-esteem and the courage to face other things that are hard. Because as Scott Peck said, life isn't easy. So my first book, which was The Obsidian Trial, 7 Steps for Overcoming Our Fear, evolved from my spiritual adventure in Egypt, the revelations that I had in the Great Pyramid. And it's really like a mystery, spiritual mystery book, because so much happened there. And I write it from the point of view where I didn't know what was going to happen next. And having my luggage taken away, not being able to call the United States, being completely isolated, and seeing all of these lessons for overcoming fear that were revealed to me. And when I pondered these later on and saw how they had changed me and changed the way that I lived in my body, because so much of my fear had been stored in my body, I realized that these were universal in nature, these lessons.
So what would you say as a psychotherapist are some of the most common difficulties that you come across with maybe some of the simplest solutions?
Well, it's a funny thing that, there's a saying in psychotherapy, I happen to think it's true now after all these years of experience, that we're never upset for the reason we think, and nobody ever comes in with what's really going on. So they come in because their marriage is on the rocks, but it's really about his addiction or her control issues or her relationship with her father. So to me, and I love Sherlock Holmes and I love Agatha Christie, and I think of myself as a mystery detective in a lot of ways. So when somebody comes in, I hear the story of what they think they're coming in for, but then it's like that detective work, and I invite them to join me to find out what is at the root of it. Because much like a light, you and I can turn this lamp on, but that's not the source of the light. That if it's not plugged in, if I haven't paid my electric bill, we're not going to get anything. So we want to go to the source of what is fueling that behavior, what is fueling that pain. And it's never, ever really in the form that we think it is. But we have to begin there, because that's the form that we're willing to face at that time. That's the form that gets us to pick up the phone and call the therapist or reach out to a friend for help. So it's kind of an interesting journey, and I have to smile sometimes. But relationships and money bring people in a lot, because that's such a sense of security and our survival needs, and not to minimize that. But there's always so much more going on. We're complex, we human beings, and as souls we're even more complex. And if we can look at ourselves without judgment, this is a big part of what the Obsidian Trials teach us, is to have a different relationship with fear. A lot of us are either afraid, thinking fear is bigger than us, or we're ashamed to have fear, like I've done something wrong because I'm afraid, or I'm a wimp. Instead of changing that relationship and saying, no, these are challenges, these are steps for growth. This is part of the long day at school that we're all experiencing here on this planet. And to look at fear as a teacher and as a guide so that we can become more, instead of as the enemy or as something that will break us. I always say that there's always a jewel in anything that happens to us. If I focus on the problem, I make the problem bigger. We strengthen what we focus on. And a lot of times people want to just talk about the problem, and it gets to loom so large that it feels bigger than what we can overcome. Instead of saying, okay, maybe you don't believe there's a jewel in this, but if we just asked if there was one, to see it. I always ask for big billboards. I don't want any little cryptic messages, because my ego, my brain will try to make it conveniently suit me. So I say, give me a big billboard so I know exactly what's going on here. But whenever I've prayed for a jewel, I've always found one. Losing my parents young taught me self-reliance. Maybe in some ways I went too far the other way of being so independent I wouldn't let anybody in, being afraid to love because of the loss of people. But I was able to overcome that as I got healthier. So it's all, it's the old lemon and lemonades, or lemon souffle, or whatever you want to make out of those lemons. But life isn't here to break us. I think that one thing that's interesting about Wayne Dyer, in his book in The Power of Intention, he said the basic thing that we have to look at, each one of us, is, do we believe at the core of our being that it's either a hostile universe or a loving universe? And if you're going to go with the premise that it's a loving universe, are you acting like it's a loving universe? And when the rubber hits the road, or when we feel threatened, or when we get a diagnosis that's scary, not to minimize that, that's when we need to embrace that loving universe and embrace people who have that same belief system. So that makes life either more difficult or easier depending on the choices we made when we're faced with that.
What is the best advice that you've ever received?
Live one day at a time. I think, so many of us, we're way ahead of ourselves or way behind. We're caught in the past, or we're trying to plot and plan our safety for the future. And it's in this moment. The now is the only time there is. And one of the values of doing psychotherapy and learning about where we came from is to really heal that wound so that we aren't living in the past. We're living in the past whether we bury it and pretend it didn't bother us, or we don't want to spend, 20 years focused on it either. It's like, okay, learn what we need to learn, heal what we need to heal so that we can get on with why we're here. Because I really believe that each one of us has a mission. And some people have very lofty, involved missions, and some people, maybe it's raising an incredible child. Not that that's a small thing, or an easy thing. But to really align with it. It's when we align with our true purpose and we're in this moment that joy is available to us. So I always say, bring it home, bring it back to the now. Even sometimes the end of the day might be too overwhelming when we're going through a lot of challenges. So if we live in the now, we're living our life. Otherwise, we're in a fantasy of either what happened in the past or writing a script about what we think is going to happen tomorrow.
What's next for you? Do you have another book in the works?
Actually, I'm working on 2 books and perhaps a film. I've got, I did write a film, a documentary film, actually, many years ago called From the Mouths of Babes, Inspirations from the Cancer Journey. About 15 years ago, my godchild was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma when she was 10 years old. And when I was visiting her in the hospital, I was very close to her. I wasn't able to have children myself. So she was very, very special to me, and probably one of the healthiest people I've ever known emotionally. And I'm sitting on her bed and I'm asking her, what's it like for her? She was very, very ill, and she was looking for a bone marrow transplant. We were on the waiting list for that. And she said, I'm really okay. She said, I have this angel, and he really came to me, and he holds me through all of my treatments. And the only thing I'm really concerned about is what are my parents going to do when they lose me? She knew she was going to die. And the way that she spoke, the peace that she had, I realized that this child was having a very different experience than her parents, than all of us that loved her, than the medical field. And I asked her, I had been a filmmaker, and I said, could I come back and just record this? Because I felt that it would be not only important for her parents to hear this, but any parent, like just seeing the other parents on the floor, intensive care. And she thought that was a great idea and made me promise that I would make this film. And unfortunately, before I was able to get the crew up there to film, she had gone into a coma and passed away. But I did make a promise, and I did spend the next 3.5 years going to 4 different treatment hospitals, Duke University Hospital, where they were doing the stem cell research down in North Carolina, Columbia Pres in New York, Maine Medical, which is where Jessie was, and just interviewing kids and finding out that many of these children were having these spiritual experiences. So I did 4 profiles, very different religious backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomic, and including one wonderful American Indian, and really told the story. And this film is basically just in all the Ronald McDonald houses. It's available for free for any parent that's going through this, and many community centers. So that, I always give very long-winded answers, I'm sorry. But the next film, I'm very, very interested in the Seva Foundation, which is out in California, and would very much like to do a film for them about eye surgery for the blind children, especially over in Nepal, to make a very short 5-10 minute film for parents without it, so there was no language barrier of really what they could expect, because it's very scary. You know, these doctors come in and there's a language problem and they're going to do eye surgery on their child, and some of the blindness is really just cataracts or something minor. But how do we communicate this so the parents are willing to have this done, and so that they can convey it to the child as well? So I wanted to make a film that didn't involve language, that was just visual for the parents, to show them what the treatments entailed so that we could get as many children as possible the treatments that are needed, because it's an amazing foundation. I've just started to get involved with them, and haven't even really told them about my idea for the film, although they know I have one. But, you know, I have always loved film, but it's about making a difference. It's about helping one another, and every book I've ever written and the films, it's all about loving. It's all about the things that I've loved. I wrote a book about animals because of my golden retriever got me through a very tough time in my life. So that's called Angels with Fur. And the children's book that I wrote, Islands in Heaven, is really Jesse's story, and really what is it like when a child dies and goes to heaven and sees everybody down on the earth crying, devastated at the loss, and she asks God if she can come down just for a day to let everybody know she's okay. And God says, that's fine, except you aren't going to be able to speak. And so it just shows how she does this, how she lets everybody know in this small island up in Maine, which is where she lived, how she let everybody know that she was happy, and that she was wanting had that happiness for them as well. So, you know, everything comes out of, we were talking about before about the jewel in the sorrow, that to be able to have done this film, the children that I met doing this film, the families that it's helped, the children's story, the book on alcoholism, and certainly the 7 Steps for Overcoming Our Fear. I'm going to be actually at Omega this summer, July 13 through 15, doing an intensive weekend on the 7 Steps for Overcoming Our Fear, and doing a lot of yoga therapy, and nobody needs to read the book ahead of time, but really invite anybody who's wanting freedom from the crippling effects of either the trauma from their childhood or just what life has done. I really invite you to join me at Omega this summer out in Rhinebeck, New York. And I just want to thank you, Ann, for having me on. I really appreciate it, and I'm so glad that you're inviting all these wonderful people on your show and doing this, because you have a gift for this as well.
Thank you. Where can people find your books and more information about the Omega event?
Well, in terms of the Omega event, you can, the catalog comes out in March, but you can just go to omega.com and look at the calendar. Like I said, I think it's July 13 through 15, and it's called 7 Steps for Overcoming Our Fear. You can order a book directly through me if you wanted a signed copy, and I'm at 401-667-7399. That's my institute. It's in Plum Beach in North Kingston, Rhode Island. Or you can go on Amazon.com and 7 Steps for Overcoming Our Fears, the Obsidian Trials, Dying for a Drink. If you Google them, they'll come up, and they can buy them that way. You know, I really feel that each one of us has a purpose and a mission, and part of what I do success coaching privately for people to find that mission. And, you know, my mission was to bring the big picture of either the complexities of your life into a focus, a practical way, using spirituality and day-to-day challenges. How do we make that work? How do we discover why we're supposed to be here? I know that I'm here to help people to find that light within themselves. Somebody helped me, and, you know, there's nothing that I enjoy more is to see that light go on when somebody realizes, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, and has the courage to go out and do it. So that's what I wish for everybody, whether you work with me or not, just to find that light within you and to fulfill that purpose, to feel the joy, and to know that at the end of the day, you stood up to the plate. Maybe we don't always, you know, hit a home run, but we stood up to the plate.
Dr. Santi Meunier is a practicing psychotherapist, author, producer, and lecturer. You can find out more information about Dr. Meunier at www.santimeunier.com. Thank you so much for that lovely conversation. My next guest is Tim Leonard. He's an award-winning writer whose articles and essays have been published in the Boston Globe, the Providence Journal, the Providence Phoenix, Rhode Island Monthly, the Christian Science Monitor, and the Montreal Gazette. His short fiction has been published in a number of literary journals in the United States and Canada, and he is the author of the book Rhode Island 101, Everything You Wanted to Know About Rhode Island and Were Going to Ask Anyway. David Broussard of the Providence Journal wrote of the book, Rhode Island 101 may pose as a basic primer of the ocean state, but it pokes into corners of history and nibbles on doodles of contemporary culture that validate our oddness. Even the hoariest of historians will be repeatedly startled and amused by the contents of this book. And I have to say, that's a lovely description. I agree completely. Just in time for the holidays, I sat down with Tim and his dog Zeus in Cranston over a cup of coffee to talk about the book Rhode Island 101 and to ask him the question of the week, what's the best advice you've ever received? And Tim offers some pretty practical advice. We'll be right back after this short break with author Tim Leonard. I'm Ann Marie Spatharakis, and thank you so much for joining us today. You're in the studio.